So everything you said was so on point. Like I have never heard of a chart analyzed like this before, and it is fascinating.
what, what I would like to do now is take a look at the chart of a person who has a long-standing history of medical stuff. I'll say stuff. So we're going to go with the first person whose name begins with T, and that's all I'm going to say because I believe in preserving people's anonymity. And this is chart number one for T. Great. Date of birth, please.
June 30th, 1986.
June 30th, 1986. Time of birth?
4:35 in the morning.
4:35 a.m. Place of birth?
That would be Tucson, Arizona.
Tucson, Arizona. Great. Okay, so where did you get your time of birth from, or who told you that was your specific time of birth?
My mother.
Okay, and did she get that from your birth certificate specifically?
Yes.
Got it. Okay, perfect. Wonderful. And have you seen your chart before?
I've pulled it up online, but it has never really been explained to me in depth, no.
Do you know that you have Gemini rising?
Yes.
Perfect. So that's all the information. Wonderful. All right, so T, you could go back and mute your microphone, and I'm going to dive in and do my thing for a bit, then we're going to bring you back on. So those questions are very important questions for us to lead into any astrological reading with. The first question is, where did that time of birth come from? Because oftentimes when people say that they're born at 4:30 or 4:35 or 4:45 or 4 p.m., it's oftentimes an estimation. And so this is something that as professional astrologers, we're very cognizant of because you want to, it's a piece of information to be cognizant of, especially if you're practicing a system of astrology that's very heavily based on the exact time of birth. There are some systems of astrology where the exact time of birth isn't as pressing, but there are others where the exact time of birth most definitely is. Okay, so from my astrological perspective, my brain is already seeing the combinations within this chart that are problematic from a medical astrology perspective. Because in medical astrology, we use what are known as hard aspects. And so what is a hard aspect? So what is a hard aspect? A hard aspect is a combination between planets that is divisible by 45 degrees. So for example, we have the square, which is 90 degrees. We also have the semi-square. I don't want to get into the technicalities because I don't want to bore anybody, but the semi-square, which is 45 degrees. We have the conjunction, which really isn't an aspect at all, but the conjunction is 0 degrees. We have the sesquiquadrate. Sesquiquadrate basically means 45 times 3. 45 plus 45 gives you 90. 45 plus 45 plus 45 gives you 135 degrees. And then finally, we have the opposition. The opposition is 180 degrees. These are the main or the major aspects that are of immense importance within medical astrology practice. There are other aspects known as soft aspects that are divisible or that come from divisions of 60. So the 60-degree sextile is a soft aspect. The 120-degree trine is a soft aspect. But soft aspects have nothing valuable to give us as far as medical astrology is concerned. So I see that she has the Moon Mars in a square relationship because they're roughly 90 degrees away from each other. And so I know already that Moon Mars is one of the primary combinations that we find within the charts of people who have excessive acidity within their gut. So when people have acid reflux, Moon Mars is oftentimes one of the things We know that acid reflux, the technical name for that is GERD, gastroesophageal reflux disorder or disease. They used to call it disease, now they call it disorder. But GERD, one of the ways how GERD shows up can be through the moon Mars specifically, or the sense of having a body that in general tends towards inflammation faster than it tends towards non-inflammation, or faster than it tends towards just being cool in general. So moon Mars within the chart of a woman oftentimes is something that corresponds with GERD, and it oftentimes corresponds with gut inflammation. Now, another thing that I know about moon Mars is that probably 2,000 years ago, an astrologer by the name of Dorotheus. So moon Mars is one of the combinations that we find within GERD. It's also something that 2,000 years ago, Dorotheus, who was an astrologer 2,000 years ago, Dorotheus of Sidon. Sidon is a location. We call him Dorotheus of Sidon. He doesn't have a last name. Dorotheus of Sidon says that when a woman has moon Mars within her birth chart, this is one of the indications that she has. Okay, before I go on, I do want to say that when we talk about medical astrology, we talk about it specifically. We kind of just go for the jugular. Whereas when we're talking about other forms of astrology, we pussyfoot quite a bit, because pussyfooting makes everybody feel a little bit nicer in general, and we like that, we whatever. So medical astrology isn't that, and I wanted to catch myself before I said the next thing, because the next thing is it's a strong topic. So one of the things we're going to talk about within this is reproductive health, and you could let me know in the chat before I go on whether or not that's something that you're okay talking about, because if you leave it to me, I'll just go straight through. So let's know in the chat box if that's something that's okay. That is fine. Great. Wonderful. So Dorotheus of Sidon tells us that when a woman has her moon afflicted by Mars, that's one of the indications that she has to carve the baby out of the womb. Now, within the 21st century, carving the baby out of the womb doesn't mean the same thing it meant 2,000 years ago, because 2,000 years ago, when you carved the baby out of the womb, you died. Whereas today, we live within a space and a time where there's a lot of procedures where we can remove a fetus and still go on to live to tell the tale, basically. So moon Mars is one of the things that we find within the charts of women, yes, who do have GERD. GERD is a big part of that. Extra inflammation within the gut. And gut inflammation can also manifest as colitis. Any itis is an inflammation, isn't it? Because the suffix of itis refers to inflammation. So gastritis is one moon Mars manifestation, as is colitis, moon Mars manifestation, because the moon in general is representing our gut and our digestive system to a very large extent. So moon Mars has something to do with all of those things, but the moon also has to do with the womb. Now, there are a lot more medical astrologers who would give the moon a larger precedence over the moon, who would give the moon a larger level of rulership over the womb than I do. Because for me, the moon isn't my first go-to when it comes to reproductive health. Venus is my first go-to more often than not when it comes to a woman's reproductive health and a man's reproductive health as well. I go to the Venus, I don't go to the moon. However, there are certain moon combinations in which we do see this theme of reproductive health being an issue. And so moon Mars is one of those combinations. And so this combination can refer to excessive bleeding during menstruation. Why is that? That is because if the moon is representing the womb and Mars is representing war and bloodshed, then what happens when I put war and bloodshed in my womb? It creates a sense of excessive bleeding during menstruation. We know that the technical name for that is menorrhagia. Menorrhagia is the meno is coming from the menorrhagia. Menorrhagia is excessive bleeding during menstruation. Moon Mars is also a combination for dysmenorrhea. Dysmenorrhea is excessive pain during the menstrual process. So these are two of the things that we see with this combination. It's a very strong gut health combination, but it's also a very strong digestive system. So it's also a very strong reproductive combination within the chart of a woman. Now, the next thing, and then before I go on, there's also another piece I want to say. And the other piece I want to say is that I am completely fine being wrong about something. And I'm also fine or what I say to clients is that at this stage in your life, you were born in 1986, which means you're past the age of 30 years old. At this stage in your life, you have already gone through every experience that I could possibly describe within your birth chart. There's nothing new that I could say to you about your birth chart that you haven't already gone through. Therefore, for me, when I speak about medical astrology, I speak about it retrospectively. And I'm okay for somebody to say, that thing just doesn't apply to me at all. I hold no attachment to things needing to apply to people, because I never want for somebody to feel as if I'm speaking forward into their lives. Now, I have had people who I've said certain things to within our consultation, and they say, oh no, I don't have that. And then a few months later, they come to me and they say, well, I went to my doctor checked me for this thing, and it turns out, Mychal, that thing that you brought up was accurate. However, in general, if I say something and it feels like a hard no, just tell me hard no, because I won't take anything personally. So that's the Moon Mars as a combination. Now, another thing that the Moon Mars can represent, particularly within the chart of a woman, and really within the chart of anybody, is the rough mother, the aggressive mother, the rough and tumble mother, the mother who is a little bit rough around the edges, harsh around the edges, and who's representing a possible source of volatility within our own life. So this could be reference to this person's mother as well. And as a result of the mother being that way, it probably also forced or inspired or caused this person herself to also take on that sort of fiery disposition or that sort of fiery affectation, because that's what she saw reflected within the woman within her family. Now, another thing that we see with the Moon Mars often is that when we have Moon Mars within the chart of anybody, it can sometimes point towards a story of potential domestic violence against the women within our family. And so here what we're seeing is the multiple ways in which information astrologically tends to be enfolded. Because on the one hand, we can talk about Moon Mars as your gut inflammation, colitis, diverticulitis, gastritis, all the itises. On the other hand, we could take that same Moon Mars and bring that to another level and speak about that moon as your womb, heavy bleeding during menstruation, excessive pain during the menstrual process. At another level, we can bring that moon down and speak about the mother specifically, the potential for harsh realities to exist in relation to the women within this lady's life, and her possibly seeing women have to take on a role that they really shouldn't have had to have taken on, or that they shouldn't have had to have taken up as a result of some of the forces of adversity that might have existed within her early childhood home. So we're seeing multiple levels of interpretation unfold through the same one planetary combination, because in the words of Hermes Trismegistus, few are the seeds with which God creates the universe, but they are mighty, strong, and good. From a Kabbalistic perspective, God created the universe using the 7 classical planets: Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Sun, Venus, Mercury, and the Moon. And comparatively, the 7 classical planets are limited when we think about the scope of the universe that they're meant to describe. The 7 classical planets are meant to describe every single thing that occurs within our universe, and there's only 7 of them. But in the words of Hermes, few are the seeds with which God used to create this universe. But even though they are few, they are mighty, strong, and good. Therefore, the moon has to take on multiple levels of interpretation, and does take on multiple levels of interpretation, as do every planetary combination within our birth chart. So that's our Moon-Mars discovery, or our Moon-Mars investigation. Now, the next place where I tend to go, that's not even true. But the next place that I want to go, because of what we're seeing here, is I want to go to the planet that is next from the moon. First of all, let me see if that moon is doing anything else in this chart. I'm looking around the chart to see if there are any other hard aspects to the moon within this chart, and the answer is no. So now I'm going to move on and see whether or not Mercury is having any hard aspects. There was another thing I had to say. The moon within this chart is located in Aries. The signs of the zodiac correspond with specific regions of the human body. The signs of the zodiac correspond with specific regions of the human body. When a planet is in a particular sign of the zodiac and afflicted within that sign, the part of the body that corresponds with that sign will also often be afflicted. When a planet is in a particular sign of the zodiac and afflicted while in that sign, the part of the body that corresponds with that sign will also be afflicted. So if we come back over here and we take a look at where the moon is in the sign that corresponds with Aries, or the moon is in the sign of Aries, and Aries corresponds with the head. The moon is afflicted because she is in a 90-degree relationship with Mars. Therefore, we have a sign of the zodiac, or we have a planet in a sign of the zodiac and afflicted while in that sign, and therefore that can correspond as a larger tendency towards that part of the body being afflicted. So this could indicate head issues, head-based issues, head-based injuries. We say injuries because Mars is the planet that corresponds with injuries and inflammation and irritation. And there's another I word, I think it's infection. I made up the 4 I words, so sometimes I forget them. But it's injury, inflammation, irritation, infection, and there's another I word someplace there as well. My students know more than me because I've taught them everything I know. So when we have the moon Mars in this way, this could represent a head-based injury, head-based irritation, head-based inflammation, but it could also just represent a tendency towards migraines, a tendency towards splitting headaches as a result of the moon being in the sign that corresponds with the head, and Mars afflicting that could say that there feels like there's a war in my skull, basically. So that's one of the ways how we would take a look at that. Now, one of the other things I would say is that the chart is very dry. The chart is very dry insofar as the moon represents the water content of the physical body. And so when I have a dry chart, it makes us feel as if I'm also prone to dehydration. And maybe that's because the native doesn't like to drink a lot of water. So the native could also be prone to dehydration in general, which can lead to dry skin or skin irritation and all of these things as well. So even though we're not doctors, it doesn't hurt to say to somebody, hey, you probably could benefit from drinking more water, especially if your doctor says so. And you have to say, especially if your doctor says so, because you're not a doctor unless you are. And as a non-doctor, you can't go around prescribing anything, not even water, because there are some people who can't even drink water without it irritating the epithelium, the inner lining of their throat. So some people can't even drink water. So prescribing that somebody drinks water and that person has an inner throat lining that can't handle that, you'll kill them, basically. So as medical astrologers, it's also important for us to understand the scope of our practice. And it's important for us to understand that we can prescribe. There is no prescriptive element of medical astrology, which is a huge problem I have within the current astrological community, because people go around all day long telling people, oh, you're a Libra, take some magnesium. Oh, you're this thing, take some zinc. Oh, you're this thing, which for me is knocking futs, truly. So, however, Moon Mars is saying to us that there can be a tendency towards dehydration, so the native could benefit from finding ways to hydrate herself, and for that information, send her to the doctor and let the doctor or the acupuncturist or the whoever else give her that information. So that's that for me with the Moon Mars. So I think we've exhausted the topic of the Moon Mars within this chart, and if I think about anything else, I'll say it. Now we move on to the planet above the moon, because the ancients had the planets as Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, the Sun, Venus, Mercury, and the Moon. Those are the 7 classical planets in traditional astrology. So the planet that's directly above the sphere of the moon is Mercury. So we go to the Mercury and we go and see. Now, one of the things I like to feel like I am is a detective, even though I'm not. One of the places that I work when I'm not teaching astrology is I work in a cadaver lab. And so I receive corpses and I dissect the bodies and I separate the limbs. I separate the shin from the thigh and the whatever and the hip and the whatever. So I work around dead bodies all the time. And that's a big part of what gives me excitement and pleasure and joy and glee within this lifetime. And why am I saying that? Sometimes I just say that because I like for people to know. And I can't remember why I just said it. But moving on with life, Mercury is the planet. Oh, I was saying that I like to feel like I'm a detective sometimes. And I liked Sherlock Holmes growing up. I thought that Benedict Cumberbatch was the sexiest man that was ever placed in this 3D realm, especially when he was doing Sherlock. And so I like to feel like my brain is doing the Sherlock thing. And so in this chart, we already see a statement about the reproductive story of the native. And so that's kind of standing out to my brain as being one of the things that might potentially be noteworthy within the grand scheme of things. So I'm going to have that in the back of my consciousness and see if I find other things to corroborate this story of the reproductive issue. So we're going on and we're seeing the Mercury, and I see the Mercury is in a square relationship with the Pluto. Now, I know that Mercury-Pluto is one of the combinations that we find within the charts of people who have, what is that thing called? Who have traumatic brain injuries, Mercury-Pluto. Now, we've already seen evidence of the possibility of some head trauma through the Moon Mars, and now we see another piece of evidence-ish regarding the Mercury-Pluto. So in the back of my mind, I'm saying, okay, maybe this is a chart in which the native, i.e. the person receiving the reading, maybe this is a chart in which the native may have experienced some traumatic brain injury within her earlier life, and period. That's kind of it, is kind of what I would say personally. And then the next step ahead from that is I also know that Mercury-Pluto is a combination for people who can't remember massive chunks of their life. And it's not because of any injury. Sometimes people who have Mercury-Pluto can remember massive chunks of their life because of psychological trauma. And so when I see Mercury-Pluto, that also is saying to me that the native may not necessarily have amnesia as a result of some medical issue, but the native might have amnesia as a result of some psychological trauma that she's experienced. And as a result of that, the brain puts on these blinders to prevent her from having access to those traumatic memories, because if she did have constant access to those memories, they would completely engulf the reality of her lived experience. So that's another thing that we know about the Mercury-Pluto, just from my perspective. Now, a final thing that I've discovered about Mercury-Pluto that I've spoken about within my book, I was going to say Mastering Traditional Astrology, because I can't even keep up with the books that I write, but I've spoken about this in my book, The New Western Medical Astrology, and I'm just going to bring that up on the screen so that you all can see it with me, because I don't want you to think that I'm like just making shit up on the spot, because I'm not that person. All right, so in this book, this is my book, The New Western Medical Astrology, and what combination are we looking for? Let me move all of this stuff. We are looking for the combination of Mercury-Pluto, which should be around here. Mercury-Uranus, Mercury-Pluto. She also has Mercury-Neptune, which also has other information. So Mercury-Pluto, this is on page 644 of my book, The New Western Medical Astrology, which you can get a copy of on Amazon if that's something that you desire. I hope you desire it. This combination denotes that the native has a powerful mind. The native may be extremely intelligent and understands that she has the ability to intellectually dominate others around her. She may be either extremely silent or unusually calculating about how and when she speaks. When she does speak, there is great force and gravity behind her words. This combination is found within the charts of lawyers, detectives, counselors, hypnotherapists, and in extreme cases, cult leaders. That last part doesn't concern you. Now, physiologically, Mercury-Pluto can relate to brain trauma. This combination corresponds with abnormal functioning of the nervous system and is often coupled with hard aspects from Uranus or Mars. In the charts of people who have migraines, we already saw one migraine signature that had nothing to do with this, but let's move on. Migraines, traumatic brain injuries, or some other issues that adversely impact the head. Since Pluto corresponds with abnormal growth, this combination can also signify abnormal growth within the brain or elsewhere within the nervous system. Eberton, who's another medical astrologer, lists nervous irritation as a biological correspondence of Mercury-Pluto. Whereas Mercury-Neptune may correspond with memory loss as a result of an illness or medication, Mercury-Pluto corresponds with memory loss as a result of psychologically traumatic life experiences. And finally, Mercury-Pluto is one of only two Mercury combinations that denotes fertility issues. The other such combination is Mercury-Saturn. Let's just leave it there. So when I come back over to this chart, I see that she has the Mercury-Pluto, and I know within my brain that the Mercury-Pluto has to do with it has proven itself to be a noteworthy fertility issue combination for me within my practice. And I know that the more corroboration we get, the stronger our idea or the stronger our conviction that this thing probably makes sense for this person. So I see she has the Mercury Pluto that way. And I also see that on the declination table, once again, go into a funny house of mirrors and you can see the sky from multiple perspectives. I see she also has Mercury Saturn. So Mercury Pluto and Mercury Saturn are present within her chart. And I know that both of those combinations tends to point once again to the direction of potential fertility health issues, which we kind of saw already indicated through the Moon-Mars combination. Now, on the topic of fertility, it is worthwhile to point out that the 5th house within an astrological chart is the house of our offspring. But I've discovered that the 5th house isn't just the house of your offspring, the 5th house is also the house of your fertility potential. And within the chart of a woman, the 5th house is definitely the house that's representing the uterus as well. So with all of that being said, I look at the 5th house and I see things in the 5th house that I'm familiar with. For example, I'm familiar with women who go to, and once again, take this as hypothetical, I'm familiar with seeing the Pluto in the 5th house. This is Pluto. That's what Pluto looks like. Pluto. I'm familiar with seeing women who have Pluto in the 5th house go to very specific measures, possibly not to have children within this lifetime. I don't know why that is. I just know that that's something that we tend to see quite a bit, that when the Pluto is in the 5th house, along with other factors within the chart that also point in that same direction, sometimes those women can be going to specific measures not to have children within this lifetime, or maybe the topic of children in general is a topic that is it could be a bit of a challenging topic. We also see the South Node. The South Node is in this 5th house. And the South Node is a point within astrology that could be a point that represents loss or depletion. So when we see the Pluto and the South Node in the 5th house, that can be indicating that this topic of children and child rearing could be a potentially very challenging topic for the native within this lifetime. Maybe that could be from a physiological perspective. Maybe that could be specifically from a reproductive perspective. We don't know, but we do know that there is this emphasis being placed on this topic of the children in general. Now, the next piece that we're going to do, and I promise I'm going to shut up post-haste. The next thing that we're going to do is we look at the Mercury. We've spoken about the Mercury based on Mercury and Pluto as a combination. Now we have to speak about the Mercury based on the Mercury being in the sign of Leo. Leo historically corresponds with the heart. Now, within my medical astrology writings, that has not seemed to be the case. I would have loved to have seen 10 charts of people with planets in Leo afflicted so that I could stand proudly on this piece of information that says Leo corresponds with the heart, but I have not seen that. Resultantly, I'm going to say what the textbook definition of the planet in Leo afflicted by Pluto could mean. However, I haven't really seen this overwhelmingly within my own life. So the planet in Leo afflicted by Pluto could indicate some abnormality within the cardiovascular system of the native, or some abnormality within the heart health of the native in general. That something's going on that's directly impacting the heart health, and it's probably causing the heart to function in an abnormal way. For example, atrial fibrillation is one such thing in which the heart functions abnormally because of arrhythmia in terms of the heartbeat. So that could be one manifestation of some abnormality that's impacting the cardiovascular system of the native in general. And that's kind of all I have to say about it. Because once again, I haven't overwhelmingly found a reason for me to think that the Leo has to do with the heart within the 21st century, even though we have 2,000 years of astrology that says that it does. Now, the next piece that we see happening with this Mercury is that this Mercury has a relationship to the Neptune. Mercury-Neptune, as far as I'm concerned, is one of the most significant combinations within the chart of anybody as far as respiratory health is concerned, because Mercury-Neptune has to do with respiratory congestion. That could probably just be that the native is generating a lot of mucus on a daily basis and therefore should stay away from milk and dairy. That could be one manifestation of that. that the native tends to have an excess of mucus on the one hand, could be Mercury, Neptune, literally snot. On the other hand, Mercury, Neptune could also indicate just a tendency towards respiratory allergies in general, that there isn't one spring that rolls around that doesn't find the native knocked out cold as a result of the respiratory allergies that she might encounter within this lifetime. So that's another element or another expression of how the Mercury, Neptune can manifest. And I feel like those are the two main things that I want to say about Mercury, Neptune. Mercury, Neptune also corresponds with brain fog. And the reason for that is because Mercury, Neptune is one of the combinations in astrology for sleep. The other combination in astrology for sleep would be Moon, Neptune. And Mercury, Neptune can correspond with brain fog. Now, very often when a person is having thyroid-based issues, for example, hypothyroidism, Hashimoto's thyroiditis, things that slow down the thyroid gland, there can be an accompaniment of brain fog as one of the symptoms of those issues. Another issue that I've studied for a bit as far as brain fog is concerned is, what is that thing with the tick? Lyme disease. Lyme disease. It's not Lyme's disease because it's named after Lyme, Connecticut, where the tick was found. So it's not Lyme's, it's Lyme disease. So Lyme disease, we know that one of the things that people say who have Lyme disease is that, oh my God, I have brain fog. Oh my God, it's so heavy in my head. So that's another way that the Mercury, Neptune can show up. I'm not saying that Mercury, Neptune will indicate Lyme disease. I'm saying that Mercury, Neptune has to do with the brain fog that is oftentimes an extension of a larger Lyme diagnosis. Now, with the Mercury in the Leo, once again, we know that when a planet is in the sign of the zodiac and afflicted while in that sign, the part of the body that corresponds with that sign will often also be afflicted. So if the Mercury in the Leo, and once again, Leo, the ancients say represents the heart. I haven't found that to be true personally within my current situation, but the ancients say that it represents the heart. So who are we to doubt? Antiquity. So antiquity says that with this Mercury and Leo being afflicted by Neptune, that should also add towards some weakness of the cardiovascular system of the native. And that's all I'm going to say, because I can feel myself being beyond the scope of my practice in a way that doesn't necessarily turn me on or make me feel satisfied, because I don't have all of the information that I would like to have about the Leo situation. So I'm going to leave it alone and move on. Now, as we move towards a wrap-up, the final thing that I see, and it's not necessarily the final thing that I see, but in the spirit of moving towards a wrap-up, we also note that she has this very big combination of the Sun opposite Neptune within her chart. Oftentimes within the charts of women, Sun opposite Neptune can indicate that the father was an alcoholic, or that the woman tends to attract within her life alcoholic men in general. So assuming that this lady is a heterosexual lady, this could be an indication that the men within the life tend to show up in a way that is debilitated, or tend to show up in a way where they can't fully deliver on their promises. And that could either be because of substance abuse issues. This could be a sign that says that the father, the native's father, might have been the substance abuse or the person. And as a result of that, that might lead towards a larger sense of trauma within the household that she might have experienced in relationship to her family and to her father specifically, is one of the things that we can say as a result of the Sun Neptune. And because the apple always thinks that it marries somebody who isn't its parents. However, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, a lot of us do end up marrying our parents. Exactly. The exact same person who was the parent is somebody who we end up marrying. And so this could manifest as some of the issues that might have manifested within her life from the perspective of the father might then manifest within, if she is in a heterosexual relationship, it might manifest within the relationships that she's having with men in general, where she's finding that the lovers who she's attracting the lovers who she attracts don't really represent a source of stability within her life and only add to tension and friction and an overall sense of not necessarily feeling as supported as she would like to feel in general. So this is my rapid fire assessment of this chart. There's a lot more that could be said. In an ideal world, I would have gone through this by studying the Mercury first, because the Mercury is the planet that rules the sign on the cusp of the ascendant. And I would have said, oh, she has the ruler of the first house in the second house, therefore she's probably an entrepreneur. I would have gone down that route. However, I wanted to show you how I would specifically focus on the hard aspects within the chart as the major primary diagnostic tools that we have at our disposal within the context of medical astrology and what I would do with it. Now, admittedly, these planetary combinations manifest in multiple ways within a person's life. I only looked at this as if the medical piece was the only possibility. But that's not necessarily the only possibility, because there's also the sociological piece about how this manifests in terms of her relationship with people in general. There's also the psychological piece in terms of how this manifests in terms of her relationship with herself. There's also the spiritual piece in terms of how this manifests in terms of her relationship, of how she sees herself within a much larger spiritual context. However, I wanted to focus on and bring out only the medical astrological pieces so that we could see how I would look at this chart if that were all I was looking at this chart for, while still acknowledging that her life in general may be far greater than the sum total of the pieces that I would have spoken about today. So that's it from me. I'm going to turn this over to the native, and you can unmute, or maybe we have to unmute you again. So maybe if that's the thing that we have to do, let's unmute the native, and then you can dive in and just tell us how this lined up with your lived experience, basically.
I wrote notes so I wouldn't forget anything. So with Moon Mars, um, I was diagnosed with IBS at a really young age, and I had still have really bad reflux, and I've had gastric cancer. So you hit it right on the nose there. With the menstrual cycle, I thought I was dying when I was a teenager because my cramps are worse than labor.
Wow.
Um, when you talked about my relationship with my mother, we have had a strained relationship for most of my life, and I have tried as a mother to be the exact opposite of the mothers that I grew up with. Um, when you talked about head-based afflictions, I have chronic severe migraines since I was about 9 years old. I've had 2 in the past week. They're completely debilitating. So you hit that one. When you talked about dehydration, I have a problem with dry skin. And since I had my stomach removed from the gastric cancer, it is really hard for me to take in the amount of fluid that I need in a day. Um, and swallowing water is really hard for me. It has to be a thicker consistency for me to be able to swallow it. I have PTSD from childhood trauma and have really horrible anxiety. When you talked about fertility issues, I have had 2 miscarriages. Um, the Mercury Leo combination that you talked about, I was diagnosed with supraventricular tachycardia. So my heart beats fast and there will be no reason for it. I'll be sitting down on the couch and all of a sudden my heart will start racing. Like I ran a marathon. Respiratory health. I actually have an allergy to dairy. And sinus infections and bronchitis are my friend, unfortunately. I also have asthma and I've had pneumonia. Um, you talked about brain fog. That is a yes. And I have Hashimoto's disease. Um, and my father did drink a lot when I was growing up, and he's actually the reason why I moved out when I was 17. Because it got to where I couldn't take it anymore. Um, the men that I have dated, I am pansexual, so gender is not a thing that factors into anything.
Mhm.
But um most of my heterosexual relationships, like the men that I have dated, have not given me stability and have been horrid relationships. But now I am I've been together almost 10 years with my transgender partner. So everything you said was so on point. Like I have never heard of a chart analyzed like this before, and it is fascinating.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I sincerely appreciate that. And 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 I also appreciate hearing your story because I don't know everything because there's this scene from William Shakespeare where somebody says to this other person, there's more in heaven and earth, Horatio, than exists within your philosophy. And so for me, I know that I'm really good at what I do. However, I'm also quite aware that there is a whole world, a whole universe left that I haven't actually tapped into yet within my own astrological studies. And I want that. And so when I hear your story and when I give my delineation and then you give your story afterwards, it helps me to fine tune my approach. And then I say, okay, well, we could have done this thing this way, or we could have gone this route, or we could have done this other thing. But I only see that retrospectively after I hear your story. So I just want to say thank you for being vulnerable and being willing to share with us in this way, because the more that we have people to share in this way, the more we start to amass a body of evidence that says that astrology is valid. And the point at which we say that astrology is valid, we also begin saying that magic is valid, because astrology, as much of a technical discipline as it is, it's also a magical discipline. So when we begin to validate one arm of what we do in this evidence-based way that I've done this evening, we begin to cause cracks in the system that says that what we're doing is bullshit. And we begin to let people see that there is more within heaven and earth than exists within their science or than exists within their philosophy. So thank you so much for sharing with us. And for those of you, if this was exciting for you, I teach this. I think that that's like the biggest thing I want to say. I teach this. And we have one of my upcoming courses is Medical Astrology, our preliminary course. This is something that I teach people to do. And I specifically believe that if you're going to spend your money to study with somebody, that person needs to give you a deliverable transformation within your life. And so if you want to learn how to do medical astrology in this way, in the way that I've described this evening, we have a 5-week preliminary course coming up that starts literally on Monday. And then after that 5-week preliminary course, we have another 5-week advanced course. And I will be teaching you every single thing I know, every single thing I've written in my book, The New Western Medical Astrology, which is literally everything that I am, I'll be teaching in this program. And I think medical astrology is so important because it gives us a context for how to look at ourselves and not just how to look at others. I fly a lot. And when I fly, I always hear them say, please make sure that you put on your life jacket before you try to help somebody else. And as people who live and practice within a mystical tradition or a magical tradition, we like to be of service to people and we like to help everybody else around us, but we don't actually like to help ourselves. And so as a result of that, we end up burning out and we don't really know how to take care of ourselves in the same way that we know how to take care of others. So come and study medical astrology so that you can have a context for how to look at your own life, how to look at your own chart, and how to make it make sense for you at the end of the day. So once again, that starts on October 20th. This is my YouTube channel as well. It is Oraculos Astrology with Mychal A. Bryan. I'm going to put that in the chat so that you all can follow me on YouTube. I have so much information on YouTube. You could spend days and days and days just watching our YouTube videos and you will be quite content. So this is my YouTube channel. Please do like and subscribe to the Oraculos podcast over on YouTube as well. And finally, if you want to be a part of our community, we do have a community called Mychal's Cosmic Conservatory, which is where we dive into the magical heart of astrology and astral divination. Here's me surrounded with all my students. That's not all of them, but that's a lot of them. And there's a lot packed in here as well. We have a Kabbalistic Tarot study circle because the Kabbalistic Tarot is literally the pillar upon which my life is built. And if you don't know about the Kabbalistic Tarot, then I'm your guy. And we also have all sorts of things. We have a lucid dreaming community, spiritual development classes, which focuses on developing some of our extrasensory perceptive skills so that when we come into a reading like this, we can approach this sort of reading with a level of extrasensory perception. And we also have a full lineup of the master classes that are going to be happening for the next 9 months. And all of this is just for $54 a month, and you can cancel at any time. So I sincerely hoped to see you in my Oraculos universe because I really do love being here in the Somot.con universe. And I'm really appreciative of being able to be back here once again for another year to share this astrology that I love and this astrology that has given me a platform to speak to you in this sort of way. So thank you from the bottom of my heart.